Travel creates new experiences and unforgettable memories. Through landscapes, food, scents, and textures, it awakens and satisfies our senses. The endless joy and inspiration of traveling.
The Supreme Court today overturned a lower court's acquittal of Democratic Party presidential candidate Lee Jae-myung on election law violation charges, setting a rule as to what amounts to freedom of expression and what constitutes falsehood for someone running for political office. This comes at a critical time when the presidential election is only about a month away. Acting President Han Duck-soo resigned today. He is expected to officially announce his presidential bid tomorrow. Finance Minister Choi Sang-mok will serve as the caretaker once again. Korea has been officially confirmed as the contractor for the Czech Republic's new nuclear power plant project, setting another milestone 16 years after its last overseas nuclear plant project. It's May 1st, 8 p.m. in Seoul. This is Newscenter. Thank you for joining us. I'm Yoon Jung-min. We'll start with a major ruling today ahead of the presidential election next month. The Supreme Court today returned to the High Court an election law violation case against DP's presidential candidate Lee Jae-myung, with the intent of a guilty verdict. It set the rule by drawing a line between what amounts to freedom of expression and what constitutes false information when it comes to statements by candidates that could affect voters. Our political correspondent Shin Ha-young reports.
The Supreme Court has sent the election law violation case of Democratic Party presidential candidate Lee Jae-myung back to the High Court. The top court was split 10-2. It had a full bench oversee the case and reviewed it at an unusual fast pace ahead of the upcoming presidential election. Thursday's ruling follows an appeal by prosecutors against a High Court ruling in March that had overturned an initial guilty verdict by a local court. In the initial verdict by Seoul Central District Court in November, it was convicted of making false statements in 2021 leading up to the presidential campaign in the following year. The Supreme Court on Thursday also provided guidelines for determining which statements by candidates are considered false. Regarding the meaning of expressions, the court emphasized that it should be interpreted from the perspective of the general voter, not the candidate or the court itself. When judging false facts, it emphasized that it's important to consider whether the statement is minor and doesn't affect voters' judgment or if it's significant enough to mislead them. In this regard, the court ruled that e-statements are considered as spreading false information under Public Official Election Act. Lee Jae-myung did not appear in court on Thursday as defendants are not required to be present. He said the ruling is completely different from what he believed.
The ruling is completely different from what I thought. The law is an agreement by the people, and the will of the people is what matters most.
The DP criticized the ruling, calling it clearly political and rushed, and accused the court of unfairly interfering in the presidential election. On the other hand, the People Power Party welcomed the ruling, called for Lee's resignation, and urged the DP to nominate a new candidate.
The Supreme Court confirmed that Lee distorted public judgment by spreading false information. That alone disqualifies him as a presidential candidate. Stepping down is just common sense.
Lee will now face a retrial at the Seoul High Court. Since the court must follow the Supreme Court's decision, he is expected to be found guilty. The court is expected to hold a sentencing hearing to decide each sentence. Thursday's ruling drew much attention as it could have affected presidential frontrunner Lee's eligibility to run in the upcoming election. With the case sent back for a retrial, his candidacy remains unaffected since the final ruling has yet to be made. However, if he is elected before the ruling, it could spark controversy over whether the trial should be paused during his term. If the ruling comes before the election, and if Lee receives a fine of 1 million Korean won, about $700 or more, he would be barred from running for elections for 5 years, including the June 3rd election. If sentenced to a prison term, the ban extends to 10 years. 신하영, Arirang News.
Acting President and Prime Minister Han Duck-soo stepped down from his position this afternoon. He is likely to make his presidential bid official in the near future. Our correspondent Oh Soo-young explains its implications.
Acting President and Prime Minister Han Duck-soo resigned on Thursday in a bid to take on a, quote, greater responsibility just weeks before the June 3rd presidential election. In a televised address to the nation, Han bowed out of his position, saying he made the final decision to resign.
I have just left my position as acting president and prime minister.
Reflecting on South Korea's rapid economic development and 5 decades of its public service, the former official said the country now stands at the crossroads of domestic, economic and geopolitical complexities.
Will our economy, now ranked among the world's top 10, grow stronger and join the G7? Or will it stall and fall behind? Will Korean politics move toward cooperation or fall deeper into extremism? We are grappling with these two questions right now.
Between the choices of continuing his immediate duties or taking on a greater responsibility, Han said he decided to step down from his current role. Following the impeachment and removal of former President Yoon Suk-yeol, Han Duck-soo has been the nation's interim leader. While he was impeached himself by the National Assembly, the Constitutional Court restored him to his duties just 38 days ago.
Han's departure marks the third change of acting president since December, leaving the country's governance in the hands of Finance Minister Choi Sang-mok once again, until a new South Korean leader is elected.
Han's announcement comes just 3 days before the legal deadline for public officials to quit if they plan to run for president. He is expected to declare his candidacy on Friday as an independent and launch his campaign team on Saturday. For weeks, the 75-year-old bureaucrat has reportedly been urged by moderate conservatives in the People Power Party to enter the race. As the PPP's reputation suffers after former President Yoon declared martial law and was removed from office, Han is believed to be the most viable counterweight to the Democratic Party candidate Lee Jae-myung, who currently leads the polls. If Han Duck-soo joins the race, he's expected to form a coalition with the PPP's final candidate and work to unite other anti-Lee Jae-myung figures, including former Prime Minister and DP defector Lee Na-kyun and Reform Party leader Lee Jun-seok. Those in favour of Han cite his experience of serving as Prime Minister under both Liberal and Conservative governments, as well as Finance Minister and Ambassador to the United States. Critics say Han was part of the impeached Yoon administration and that he should focus on preparing a smooth election, not running in it. Reacting to his resignation, the DP fiercely criticised Han, deeming his potential run for president a, quote, vile ambition and threatening to scrutinise him as though ripping off every layer of an onion. Ahead of the PPP's final primary runoff, candidate Kim Moon-soo said he'd discuss a union with Han if he runs. Candidate Han Dong-un, meanwhile, said both Kim and the former acting president are remarkable people, but unable to defeat Lee Jae-myung. The PPP's runoff takes place this Saturday, leaving room for manoeuvring before candidate registrations for the race close on May 11th. Oh Soo-young, Arirang News.
A supplementary budget aimed at addressing disaster recovery, boosting exports, and supporting vulnerable groups comes following days of cross-party negotiations. The result is a compromise to expand the amount in the final package. Our economics correspondent Moon Hae-ryun has the details.
South Korea has taken a major step towards finalizing its first supplementary budget in 3 years, and the first drafted under an acting president. The two main political parties reached an agreement on Thursday to expand the package to 13.8 trillion Korean won, roughly $9.6 billion US, up from the government's original 12.2 trillion won proposal. The budget targets three main priorities: disaster recovery, boosting exports and strategic technologies, and supporting vulnerable communities. A major driver of the budget's expansion is the response to devastating wildfires, which prompted an additional 200 billion won for disaster relief. This will help double the National Disaster Reserve and upgrade emergency equipment such as drones and AI surveillance systems. As global trade tensions and export slowdowns persist, the budget allocates 4 trillion won for high-tech industries, including policy financing, export programs, and AI semiconductor investment. Another key addition is 400 billion won for regional gift certificates, aimed at boosting consumption in small businesses and traditional markets. Funding for agricultural discounts has been expanded, along with scholarships for university students. With the IMF reducing South Korea's 2025 growth outlook to 1%, more funds have been directed to construction projects to stimulate domestic demand. Experts say this could be vital for job creation and economic recovery.
Reviving the construction sector can have a strong ripple effect. It helps boost employment among low-income, unskilled workers and contributes to faster recovery in domestic demand.
The supplementary budget also targets small businesses and vulnerable groups. Measures include a new burden relief credit for electricity and insurance bills, traditional market vouchers, and expanded loans for students and low-income youth. This emergency budget may serve as a stepping stone for more extensive fiscal action later this year. Moon Hae-ryun, Arirang News.
Korea has officially clinched a nuclear power plant project in the Czech Republic, setting another milestone 16 years after its last overseas nuclear plant project. The two sides are scheduled to sit down next week in Prague to seal the deal. Lee Soo-jin has more.
South Korea has been officially confirmed as the contractor for the Czech Republic's new nuclear power plant project. Czech Prime Minister Petr Fiala said on Wednesday that a contract to build 2 reactors at the Dukovany power plant will be signed with the state-run Korea Hydro and Nuclear Power on May 7th. This comes as the Czech government announced that it will take an 80% stake in a subsidiary of a state-run energy company CEZ in charge of construction to finance the project, resolving one of the key hurdles to finalizing the nuclear power deal with Korea. CEZ had been pursuing alternative financing options after the government expanded the project from a single unit to 2, estimated to cost more than 26 trillion won, or around $18 billion US. The project marks the first export of a nuclear power plant by a South Korean company since the Baraka nuclear plant in the United Arab Emirates in 2009.
Korean companies and Korean government has come to establish very strong reputations because they successfully moved into the European market. We have struggled with the nuclear power plant due to our political tensions, but now this market is recovered due to heavy demand for AI and also war between Ukraine and Russia.
And if the Czech government later confirms plans to add 2 new units to the Temelin nuclear power plant, Korea is expected to be granted priority negotiation rights for that project too. A consortium led by the KHNP was selected in July 2024 as the preferred bidder to build the nuclear reactors, beating France's EDF and Westinghouse from the US thanks to its competitive pricing and ability to follow tight construction timelines. While the deal was supposed to be finalized in March this year, it was delayed following complaints filed by EDF and Westinghouse against the decision. But the path to moving forward with the deal was cleared as Westinghouse and KHNP in January reached an agreement to settle the intellectual property dispute, and Czech authorities dismissed EDF appeals in April. The trial operation of the first nuclear unit is set for 2036, with the second to follow shortly after, aligning with the Czech Republic's goal of having 50% of its energy generated by nuclear power by 2050. South Korea's Ministry of Trade, Industry and Energy said that it welcomes the announcement of the official contract signing date and that it will make every effort to ensure a successful signing ceremony. The ceremony is expected to take place in Prague with representatives from KHNP and the CEZ subsidiary, as well as government officials from both countries. Lee Soo-jin, Arirang News.
Korea's exports stayed in the black in April, rising for the third month in a row. Amid widespread concerns over U.S. tariffs, however, its shipments to the U.S. were down almost 7%. Moon Ji-young covers the latest finding.
South Korea's exports grew for the third consecutive month in April, despite the impact of tariff imposed by the U.S., although outbound shipments to the U.S. saw a drop. According to the Ministry of Trade, Industry and Energy on Thursday, the value of exports last month amounted to $58.2 billion, of 3.7% compared to the previous year. This marked the highest ever for any April. This growth comes as outbound shipments of semiconductors, the country's top export engine, surged by a whopping 17% on year to reach $11.7 billion. This is the highest figure for any April, driven by strong demand for high-value memory semiconductors such as HBM and price increases of DDR4 DRAM chips. Exports of wireless communications equipment, including smartphones, and exports of biohealth products also expanded by a large margin. While exports of steel and ships both increased, shipments of automobiles, another key export item, dropped almost 4% year-on-year. This decline was largely due to weaker demand for internal combustion engine cars and electric vehicles. Regionally, exports to China rose nearly 4% on year on strong demand for smartphones and semiconductors. Exports to the European Union also surged by more than 18%, setting a new monthly record of $6.7 billion. In contrast, outbound shipments to the U.S. decreased almost 7% year-on-year, mainly due to a drop in automobile and machinery exports.
High U.S. tariffs appear to have affected South Korea's exports to the U.S., though the degree of impact differs by sector.
In the midst of global trade uncertainties, some experts highlight the need to increase local production in response to strengthening trade barriers, especially on chips.
Rather than solely insisting on exports, pursuing a strategy of increasing local production, while potentially leading to short-term industrial hollowing out, is a necessary long-term approach to advance our industrial structure.
Meanwhile, the country's imports decreased by 2.7%, driven by a drop in energy imports. Moon Ji-young, Arirang News.
U.S. Secretary of the Navy John Fallon has this week visited shipyards of South Korea's leading shipbuilding companies as part of the Trump administration's efforts to revive the U.S. shipbuilding industry. The office of the Secretary of the Navy said Thursday that Fallon visited Hanwha Ocean's shipyard in gov't and HD Hyundai Heavy Industries shipyard in Ulsan the day before. He stressed the importance of cooperation between the U.S. Navy and Korea's maritime industrial base, while adding that leveraging the expertise of these highly capable shipyards enables U.S. vessels to operate at peak performance. His visit comes after Trump earlier said the United States may purchase advanced ships from close countries. J-Hope, a member of South Korea's leading boy group BTS, will have the final show of his current world tour available for live viewing across 70 countries. Big Hit Music says Hope on the Stage will make its final stop in Osaka, Japan on May 31st, which will be available in a live cinema broadcast. Ticket purchases for the live viewing will begin on the 9th in Korea, and more than 90 movie theaters will be airing it. J-Hope's first solo world tour began in Seoul this February and is continuing its tour journey, which spans across 31 concerts in 15 regions in North America and Asia. A special exhibition marking the 80th anniversary of Korea's liberation is now on display in central Seoul. Through pictures, poems, and documents, it offers a glimpse into the lives and emotions of those who lived through Korea's turbulent past. Our Lee Jae-myung has their story.
This year marks the 80th anniversary of Korea's liberation, when Korea regained independence from Japan in 1945 after 35 years of colonial rule. To mark the anniversary and to show the daily lives of people during the colonial rule and other moments of Korea's recent history, the National Museum of Korean Contemporary History is holding a special exhibition called Records, Memory of You. The displays, including official documents, diaries, and literary works, show more than just historical facts. They reveal the human emotions of the time, hope, sorrow, and joy, so we can experience Korea's journey through the eyes of those who lived it. This young soldier, unable to write to his illiterate father, asked a journalist to take his photo to let him know he was alive. Tragically, he was killed in action the very next day. And this stack of letters was exchanged between a couple separated by the Vietnam War, offering a glimpse into their hope to be reunited. Korea's struggle and pride are reflected in key moments in sports history. From the 1936 Berlin Olympics, where a Korean athlete won gold in the marathon but had to stand under the Japanese flag, to the nation's first international sports victory after liberation, and its Olympics debuted under the name Korea. These milestones capture the resilience and determination of a country reclaiming its identity.
Even though it was a time we never lived through, seeing over 80 years since Korea's first Olympics appearance made me feel how far our country has come, and also gave me a strange nostalgic feeling, like I had been part of it.
I wanted to come to South Korea, to Republic of Korea, and visit and learn more about the history and art and culture of the country. So this is actually my first stop. I arrived this morning, so I'm very happy to be here, and I find the exhibit to be fascinating and very emotional, actually, because it talks about the history of of what has happened in the recent past.
Held in collaboration with the Cheongju National Museum and the National Archives of Korea, the exhibition reminds us of the meaning of 광복 in Korean, meaning the restoration of lost sovereignty, and the importance of never forgetting those historic struggles. 이은희, Arirang News.
Rain has been falling from the morning across the country. The rain had meant most of the dry weather advisories have been lifted in inland areas, but dry weather warnings around the East Coast are still in effect with relatively less rain. Please take extra precautions to avoid any fires. Rain is accompanied by gusty winds. Currently, strong winds of more than 20 meters per second have been blowing on the west coast, and strong wind advisories have been issued. Also, wind wave advisories are in place around the West Sea and central parts of the East Sea. The wind is expected to be strong across the country. Tomorrow morning, we'll start off at 8 degrees Celsius in Chuncheon and Daejeon, 11 degrees in Busan. Highs will go up to around 20 degrees all over the country. The weather will be clear again tomorrow, but rain is forecast again on Saturday. That's all for Korea. Here are the weather conditions around the world.
And that is Newscenter for tonight. Thank you for watching. A panel session up next.
Travel creates new experiences and unforgettable memories. Through landscapes, food, scents, and textures, it awakens and satisfies our senses. The endless joy and inspiration of traveling.
제21대 대통령 재외선거.
세계 어느 곳에 있어도
내가 국가대표라는 마음으로
누구보다 땀 흘리죠. 지금이 국가대표임을
보여줄 기회.
대한민국 국민의 권리.
대한민국 국민의 의무.
반드시
투표합니다. 국가를 위한 대통령 투표. 제21대 대통령 재외선거. 중앙선거관리위원회.
설레지 않을 것이고 여름이 와도 나는 흔들리지 않을 거야. 가을이 오면
Welcome to Within the Frame, where we bring the most pressing issues across the globe into focus. I'm Kim Mo-gen. With just over a month remaining until South Korea's June 3rd snap presidential election, the political landscape has taken another dramatic turn. The Supreme Court has overturned the appellate acquittal of Democratic Party candidate Lee Jae-myung in his election law violence case with a new ruling that effectively signals a guilty outcome. While such a verdict could have disqualified his candidacy, the final judgment is not expected before Election Day, allowing Lee to remain in the race for now. Meanwhile, former acting president Han Duck-soo has officially resigned today and is expected to declare his candidacy tomorrow. His entry could trigger a last-minute conservative realignment, especially as the People Power Party is set to confirm its nominee later this week. So as parties gear up to finalize their candidates, we take a closer look at the prospects of the upcoming snap election. And for this, we are joined in the studio by Hans Schadl, professor of political science at Yonsei University. Welcome, Professor.
Hi, Mo-gen. Nice to see you.
And also joining us online is Choi Hyun-sun, professor of public administration at Myeongji University. Great to have you.
Good evening, Mo-gen. Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you. So, let's begin our discussion with Professor Schadl. The Supreme Court's full bench today overturned the second trial not guilty verdict for DP presidential candidate Lee Jae-myung, who was indicted on charges of violating the Public Official Election Act. Now, this case has now been remanded for a new ruling with the implication of guilt. Could you walk us through what this actually means for his presidential candidacy moving forward, and what the legal and political consequences could he face if the appeals court returns with a guilty verdict?
Well, it certainly puts a damper on Lee Jae-myung's presidential ambitions, doesn't it? Because until today, the public opinion polling, anyway, has suggested that Lee Jae-myung would be way out in front of any of the potential candidates from former President Yoon's party, the PPP. And we can talk more in a bit about those candidates, but Lee Jae-myung was going into this court decision with a 46% likability or approval rating, and we don't yet know how this court decision is going to affect that. If the Seoul High Court, which is the lower court that will now have to look at this case once again and come up with a verdict, and it seems all indications will be that the verdict will have to be guilty, if they were somehow to put that verdict together before the election, and the fine that would be imposed on Lee Jae-myung, I believe if it were over 1 million won, then he would be disqualified from running for the presidency. And he could even be disqualified with a lower verdict as well, a verdict that would be just simply 1 million won. There's some differences of interpretation in the press as to what would be the threshold that would disqualify him. And then the length of time in which he could be disqualified from running for any future office is also, it could either be 5 years or 10 years, depending on the circumstances. In any case, the presidential election is June 3rd. It doesn't seem likely that the High Court is going to come out with a decision before the election, which means this will really be out in the court of public opinion, and it will be in the election campaign. Assuming that Lee Jae-myung stays in the race, which seems to be the early indication, the Democratic Party seems to be standing resolutely behind him. In fact, to me, the DP almost sounds a little bit like President Trump in the U.S. these days, and his supporters attacking the courts. This one, the DP has been already leveling accusations against the courts, suggesting that, this should be decided by the people. So it's going to be up to the people to decide if Lee Jae-myung is still fit to be the president, and whether he's a fairly safe bet or whether he is now a risky candidate. And let's keep in mind here that 2 of the last 3 presidents in South Korea have had to be removed, had to have been removed from power early after being impeached. So I would think there are going to be quite a few voters, maybe even some swing voters, that are going to be asking the question as June 3rd approaches, do we really want to be at risk of going through yet another impeachment or yet another removal of a president or a constitutional dispute if some sort of legal judgment were to come down the road against Lee Jae-myung if he were to be the president and if the courts were to rule against him after he takes office. Because that's what might end up happening, right? The Seoul High Court will likely have its decision after Lee Jae-myung becomes the president. And then there are all sorts of constitutional questions right there. It's Article 84 as to what kind of liability a president would have in the event of a court verdict against the president, a conviction really. So there's going to be a lot of unanswered questions right through the campaign as long as Lee Jae-myung is the candidate, and we'll see how all that plays out.
Right, so it will be for the people actually to decide on election day to, get the risks or not. Now, let's also move on to Professor Choi. So also today, former acting President Han Duck-soo has submitted his resignation from office, and he's also expected to announce his candidacy by tomorrow. And it's widely expected that he'll align with the PPP. Now, yet the party's nominee will only be finalized this Sunday. How do you interpret the timing, and what's the most likely scenario that could unfold around a possible conservative unity ticket?
Yeah, I think our Prime Minister today resigned, and the former Prime Minister Han Duck-soo's timing seems very deliberate. By stepping in right now, before the PPP picks its own nominee, he's likely, maybe Han Duck-soo likely to, hoping to present himself as a unifying option, especially with the conservative side still divided. I think that May 1st, today is a very special day because one candidate from the DP now found guilty, convicted by the Supreme Court, and one strong, maybe possible candidate, Han Duck-soo, resigned today, and he will announce his candidacy for the president, the election. So I think we must remember this May 1st. I think his future, maybe if there are no clear front runner emerges in the Conservative Party, maybe there are chance maybe top party could rally around him, but things are so moving so fast. So I think it's a timing issue. Probably now the Kim Mun-soo and Han Dong-un is still learning, and they are very strong candidate. Also, Han Duck-soo is a very strong candidate. So I think that depending on the who support, those people who support the Conservative Party, and then I think under the rule of our elections, it must be decided before the May 7th, which is Han Duck-soo still can be the candidate of the PPP or not.
So let's stay with this conservative unity ticket, Professor Shuttle. PPP candidate Kim Mun-soo expressed before he has expressed his openness to this unification effort, while his rival Han Dong-hun has been dismissing speculation of merging with Han Duck-soo. So if this push for unification actually fails before the candidate registration deadline, what do you think, what kind of an impact would this have on the competitiveness of this conservative bloc?
Well, here it's going to be up to the People Power Party to figure out which way they want to go and which candidate might be the strongest, or at least until at least today, I'd say at least the least likely to be a weak candidate. All three of the prospects, if I go and look at the public opinion pollings, for now, for the PPP possibilities, or Han Duck-soo running as an independent, suggest that the numbers are actually quite weak compared to Lee Jae-myung. Han Duck-soo was the strongest of the three challengers to Lee Jae-myung, but even there, the chances were quite slim. Lee Jae-myung's chances are quite high of winning the election, regardless of who the opposition would be. So it's almost as if we need a whole new set of public opinion polls now. If Lee Jae-myung is damaged, how will Han Duck-soo, how will Han Dong-hun, how will Kim Mun-soon, each of them perform against this reshaped race, perhaps, now that Lee Jae-myung has the legal cloud over his head? Han Duck-soo is the sitting acting president until midnight tonight. He's been the prime minister. He was also the ambassador to the U.S. under the Lee Jae-myung presidency. He was also a former prime minister in the Roh Moo-hyun government. So he's seen as somebody who's quite established in politics. He's now elderly, but so is Donald Trump. I think if Korean voters are thinking back to the 2022 election, when they were looking for a president who could strengthen ties with the U.S., and if Korea is in a position now where maintaining ties with the U.S. or dealing with the Trump presidency might be a big consideration, then Han Duck-soo might have some advantages. On the other hand, he'll be connected in the minds of some voters with former President Yoon Suk-yeol. Even though Han distanced himself from the martial law bid, there'll be voters who will still associate him with that. I think that makes Han Dong-hoon an interesting candidate from the PPP side. He's been the stronger of the two compared to him versus Kim Moon-soo. On the other hand, though, you have Yoon Suk-yeol's faction that still holds it against Han Dong-hoon for voting in favor of stopping the martial law bid, supporting the impeachment bid for President Yoon. Han Dong-hoon really broke away decisively from Yoon, and that's interesting because Han was a career prosecutor. And Han was a very close friend of Yoon's going into the Yoon presidency. So many people on the Yoon wing of the party, and those folks still vote, they view Han as somebody who betrayed the party quite critically. So that's a liability for Han Dong-hoon going forward, and whether the voters want to have another former prosecutor as a president too, as opposed to a career politician. So there's a lot of gamesmanship and kind of strategic calculation that the PPP will have to try to do to figure out which way is going to be the best foot forward for them now against Lee Jae-myung.
Right, so a lot of internal calculus to make. Well, Professor, thank you so much for, giving us a background of each scenario. Now, let's also take a look at the policy battlefield that's available so far. Many of the leading promises, particularly around youth debt relief, AI education, and housing subsidies are highly expansive. Professor Choi, are we seeing some credible fiscal roadmap from either side?
I think there are big plans for big promise now emerged, but neither side has shown, like a PPP and DP, shown yet a clear plan for how they can make the money for these big plans. I think for youth in in South Korea, maybe they want to see the candidate who can maybe promising about the transform the Hell Joseon from the Hell Joseon to the Korea tomorrow. I think that those are three important maybe policy things stuff is very important for them. I think the Lee Jae-myung of the candidate of the DP. He proposed creating a national AI fund. That's very interesting because it is a good model about private and public partnership, and that kind of fund is maybe possibly we have some kind of shortage of our national budget, so I think it can compromise some of the issue. Also, so PPP, People's Power Party, talking about the tax breaks and the private funding, which is also very interesting. I think both parties showing a little bit about how can they make the realistic plan, but still we need to wait how they proceed. Their some promise is coming on. Also, I think still experts and maybe even the international organization like IMF still there are some warning. We don't have enough budget. For these big promise. So I think we need more time. Still waiting. Yeah.
Right. So these promises seem ambitious, but we'll really have to see if they would be supported by some funding, actually. Now, former acting President Han Duck-soo is actually expected to formally propose a shortened presidential term as part of his constitutional reform plan policy. Professor Shuttle, what is the political logic behind the term reduction, and how might this differentiate him from DP candidate Lee Jae-myung, who has so far been kind of cautious about constitutional amendment?
Well, I think Han, again, I can't read his mind, but I think he may be calculating that the PPP is extremely discredited right now following Yoon Suk-yeol's impeachment. And as the impeachment debate and the ongoing debate over whether the court would have ultimately removed Yoon from office was ongoing, which it did, there was a lot of talk about looking ahead and whether the presidency is too powerful. There's been debate for years here as to whether having a one-term presidency is still a good idea. There's a lot of arguments that a single-term presidency, turns into a lame duck presidency all too early in the game, that even though the term's 5 years, sometimes after a year and a half or 2 years, the honeymoon is over and the president finds it hard to get anything done. So this really predates the situation the country's in right now. I think ever since I've been teaching at Yonsei in 2008, there's been talk about, are we ready for a two-term presidency here, more like the U.S., perhaps 2 4-year terms. So I don't think Han Duck-soo has committed to any definite horizon for how the reshaped presidential term would be. But I think he's also looking at the fact that, he'd be coming into the presidency, basically coming from the same political party for the time being anyway, as the outgoing president, the impeached president, unless he were again to run as an independent. But even if he were to run as independent, that would further strengthen the case he would try to make that he's just going to be a caretaker, an honest broker of sorts that's going to try to put the country's presidency on a different footing, stabilize things after a series of difficulties with past presidents, and that he would get out early. And I don't think the end point for his term is yet set in stone, but it could be 2028, it could be even shorter. He would be in office simply to shepherd through some constitutional reform, and then there'd be another election going forward with this new set of arrangements. Whereas the DP, they're going to stick more to the status quo at this point. Lee Jae-myung, as you point out, he's not been talking about constitutional reform. And I think that's partly because the DP is currently dominant in the assembly. If they get into the Blue House, well, it's not the Blue House anymore. It could be the Blue House again. But if they get back into the presidency at that point, they'll have the upper hand in both the executive and the legislative branch, and then they can chart out any kind of constitutional change, if any, as they see fit later on. So absent any driving policy force that otherwise would lead to support for Han Duck-soo, that might be a way that he would try to distinguish himself from everybody else in the pack. Even if the PPP were to not get behind him and leave him as an independent, he could still try to be a kind of third-party candidate or neutral candidate in that regard. So all very much in flux.
So we'll have to see how this would resonate to voters. Now, let's also touch upon this 4.5-day work week. Professor Che, the DP envisions a long-term shift towards a 4-day model, while the PPP proposes redistributing working hours. So from a public administration standpoint, Professor, how realistic is this for the government to oversee such a rollout across sectors with, vastly different labor structures?
First of all, I love 4-day work. So probably I support that. The problem is it is not simple because the structure of the jobs in our society is complicated. Like a office worker, probably much easier, but how about the factories and the hospitals? Maybe there are big changes we need to apply 4 days and the 4.5 days work. I think that this is a long-term plan, not short. Also, I'm not sure about the distribution of the time is working for the 4.5 days. Also, DP's 4 days work is, there are a lot of the change. The institutional change we need, like labor laws, how companies will following or rules, and help how we can help the smaller business, like that. So I think it is a big issue. Also, I think maybe it could make more wide labor market inequality. Okay, so the white collar and the employee of the big company in public sector could have a more benefit. But however, some of the like unstable jobs or the manufacturing jobs will maybe maybe they can suffer more about this issue. So I think we should be very careful. I think the long-term change, step by step, and change the laws, and we must see the like a pilot test first, and then we could apply in the nationwide. So I think it's a timing issue. Maybe they can promise, but I'm sure it take like 10 years, something like that. Yeah.
Right, so actual implementation would be actually not that easy, especially for various industries like smaller employers and public sector planning. Now, recently, there was a survey by the Korea Manifesto Center on the top 10 issues for voters in this election. And for the first time, restoring fairness and trust in institutions has ranked higher than, economic issues like jobs or housing. Professor Shadow, what does this shift actually tell us about the psychological and political mood of the electorate?
Right, Mokyeon. I think it tells us voters are tired. And that voters have had 2 impeachments again to deal with in the past 10 years, both of which posed real crises to the country's constitutional democracy. Thankfully, the Constitution and the democracy withstood these 2 crises. I think they really want to go forward in a way that's going to be productive and fruitful. It goes back to what we were saying a little bit earlier. I think this election, voters are really not going to want to send somebody into the presidency that's a high risk for impeachment again, or in danger of having yet another crisis emerge on that president's watch. And I suspect also that voters have noticed the infighting to the point of paralysis between the presidency and the assembly over the past couple of years. And I suspect voters might want, again, I can't speak for the Korean people, but the polling data seems to tell us that the voters want the president and the assembly members to be more effective at working out negotiations and compromises. And all these policy goals that Professor Che was just talking about that can be stymied in a deadlock between the legislature and the assembly. In some ways, we're going to be talking really about the same kind of fundamental issues that voters were thinking about in 2022. How to make housing more affordable, how to make it more feasible economically to raise children in this society, how to fix the education system so teenagers don't burn out, how to help young adult underemployment and so forth. And if there's paralysis in the 2, policy-making institutions of the government, again, the executive and the legislative branch, things don't get done. So I think the public wants the system to have integrity for its own sake, but also so some favorable directions can be taken in public policies that will help the quality of life here.
Right, so voters are really searching for, to restore their trust with the government, and whoever captures that would be able to, take the country's next political chapter. Now, we will have to wrap up our program at this point tonight. Thank you so much for your insights and for your time, Professor Shadow.
Thank you for having me, Mokyeon.
Thank you so much. And of course, Professor Che, we appreciate it.
It was very nice. Yeah, thank you very much.
Now, that'll be all from us on Within the Frame. Be sure to tune in again next time as we continue to explore the stories that matter. Till then, stay informed and engaged.
How to survive in Korea. Barbecue restaurants. Step 1. Taking care of your clothes. Put your jacket in the plastic